maybe it's not something that was ever possible, deciding on American military intervention overseas without escalated discussion of domestic politics. But we've certainly seen more than our fair share of that discussion as the Obama administration and Congress weigh the options for what should be done in Syria. At the same time, there are weighty ethical and moral aspects to the administration's decision to act. George Washington University's Greg Lebel has first-hand knowledge of the influence politics can have on just such a moment as this, and what influence it's likely to have on this particular moment in American history. Greg, welcome back.
Nice to be here, Welton. Thank you.
I want to talk a moment about the ethics of the situation we're in right now. And I have to tell you, I was thinking about it earlier today. I don't know that anybody is in a position to judge anyone else's ethics on this problem because it is so complex. But how big a deal is it for the U.S. to act alone as opposed to in concert with the community of nations?
That's a fascinating ethical question. And I think from an ethical perspective, I don't really see a distinction between us acting alone and us acting in concert with other countries, because it does come down to that question of human rights, where we stand, where we feel that we need to take a stand. And to borrow from the president, some would say unfortunate language from a few weeks ago, where that line is. So I don't think that in itself is an ethical dilemma.
Well, let's talk about that line. What are the more moral aspects of a red line over chemical weapons after so many thousands of deaths already in the Syrian conflict? I mean, you can say this is a humanitarian effort, which gives it ethical credibility, but you can argue a humanitarian effort either way.
Yeah, I think that the ethical question has more to do with how we go in as opposed to whether we react. I think back to Rwanda, Kosovo, Bosnia. Those were situations where I think there developed a general consensus that there was a moral aspect to that to our involvement there. Then we look at the invasion of Iraq, which, as it turns out, was built on faulty information, either intentionally or unintentionally, depending on sort of what you believe and who you believe. So those are two very, very different situations. So I think part of the process is sort of sorting out which of these this is closest to. Unfortunately, as you said at the beginning, politics naturally sort of seeps into this discussion and has an impact on how people at least present what they're presenting as moral or ethical viewpoints.
Right. Greg, if one of the candidates for whom you worked was elected president and you were in the White House and he calls you in and says, here's the situation, it's Syria, what all do I need to be thinking about? What does the president need to be taking into consideration right now?
I think there are so many levels at which this has to be considered, which is why I think, and I think this president recognizes this, which in a way is what creates this challenge for him, because there is at its core that ethical question. That ethical or moral question about what is it that what is our role in this? What is our proper role? What is the proper role of the community of nations in this situation? Are we at a point where we simply cannot be silent anymore? Overlaid on that are all of the political aspects, both international and domestic, that come into play. Our relationship with Russia right now, how we deal with our close friends like Great Britain and Germany and France, and then once again back to that question of how does the president deal with a Congress that has been at best, not interested in working with him in a number of situations. All of this kind of comes into that's all part of the equation here.
Did the president make the situation more complex than he had to by bringing Congress into it?
Probably.
And why did he do it?
Well, and I think it gets back to to this president's recognition of the layers that are involved here. I take him at his word when he said one of the reasons he went to Congress was because, well, I think his hand was forced a little bit by what happened in the British Parliament.
Yes.
And so I think, looking at that, I think that they in the White House recognized that there was some value on an international scale for being able to say that we were going in because these two branches of government agreed. Once again, as I said, politics sort of seeps into this. I also think that the president probably saw this as an opportunity to engage Congress and I'd say particularly the House of Representatives in what would be, for the first time in a very long time, I think, an actually substantive discussion of public policy, which has not been the norm over the last couple of years.
I don't know how you feel, and it is a feeling. It's not knowledge that I'm talking about, but I've found myself pleased that he did this because you at least have a sense that there is a dialogue going on, and it's not just the people around the president that are making the decision. I felt good about that. The second thing I felt good about, Greg, was it thrills me. I mean, I'm not on this subject, but it thrills me to see Republicans arguing with each other and Democrats arguing with each other, and Democrats and Republicans coming together in their opinions, stepping out of that just, solid, we're always going to be where we are. I'm glad to see that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that what we are seeing here is divisions, not just between the parties, but within the parties. And many of these divisions have to do with principle. Thank God we're actually back at some point talking about some principles here. I don't think that's the case in every situation, but it certainly is something that's there. I agree with you. I think that the president going to Congress and starting this conversation is a healthy thing. Now, there's some who disagree vehemently with that. Some people who see this as a serious blow to presidential prestige, and so on and so forth. But I'm not sure that I agree with that.
I'm not sure I do either. And I guess I would have to say, and I would be interested in what you think, that this has gone well and will go well if Congress gives him support. If they don't give him support and he's still dedicated to going, then we've got another whole thing on our hands.
Yes. And there are a couple of things that can happen. I mean, he could win support in the Senate and not in the House. Obviously, he could win support in both houses, or he could win no support in either house. And obviously, if he wins support of both the Senate and the House, this is I think what the administration is seeking here. But if he loses in one or both houses, it does present some interesting challenges. It certainly chips away at his credibility, at his ability to get things done. He's investing a great deal in this, and this is an investment that I think the administration had hoped to be making in immigration reform, possibly still in some gun control legislation, certainly in the budget and the debt, all of which is being expended right now on the situation in Syria.
You mentioned taking into consideration Russia. How can Russia stand up for the Syrian administration in light of what's happened there?
Well, again, this is geopolitics. This is geopolitics in a way that, in some ways, we haven't seen since the end of the Cold War. This is Vladimir Putin putting himself in a position to be the anti-American leader. I mean, this is certainly what the motivation, I think, was around Edward Snowden, taking him in, and I think this continues this this approach that Putin seems to be taking to geopolitics, I don't understand it. I'm not sure what he gains or what the country of Russia gains by taking this position, but that certainly seems to be the piece that he's carved out here.
Do you have any sense of what we should be thinking about Iran's new president in terms of what happens in Syria and how that impacts maybe threats toward Israel?
You know, this is not my primary area of expertise, but from what I've read from people who I think know a lot about this stuff and are smarter than me on this stuff, the consensus that I'm hearing is that Iran is unlikely to take advantage of this situation by moving against Israel. And that's partly because Israel is rightly has the reputation of being a country that will strike back fast and furious. Right. And I think the Iranian government understands that. And I don't, as much as they might like to, I don't think there's much to gain by the Iranian government heading in that direction in the context of this issue right now.
Greg, the recent virtual collapse of Libya hasn't made it to the front pages because of Syria. And but it's just the latest example of the aftermath of short-term foreign intervention. Can you think of an instance short of World War II where the United States gets involved demonstrably with a positive outcome?
I would say it's very difficult in the 20th and 21st century, as you say, but post World War II. I think to think of an instance where the result was what we intended it to be or presented it as likely to be. Mm-hmm. No, from Vietnam, from Korea through Vietnam, no, and on to the present day. No, I don't think there is an instance when we have accomplished what it was we said we set out to accomplish.
Greg, in one way, it feels almost dirty to talk about politics at a time when so many lives are being lost in Syria, but we can't deny that politics still plays a huge role in the kind of the decision a president has to make at a time like this. Talk about that.
We have to start, I think, with the fact that this president is in his second term. We are racing headlong toward midterm elections. This is a point at which second-term presidents achieve lame duck status. Presidents try in their second terms, in most cases, to build on the accomplishments of their first terms. I think this president went into the second term with a more aggressive agenda. I think that politically, the Democratic Party still holds on to the hope that they can maintain control of the United States Senate after 2014 and possibly even win I think it's a turnover of 17 seats, which would give them the House of Representatives, which would give this president a second chance at accomplishing some of the things he's wanted to accomplish since the passage of health care reform and so forth. This takes a lot of wind out of that. This president has to spend a tremendous amount of political capital on this to move it along. So that draws some serious questions as to in terms of what he can accomplish beyond this. And obviously, much of this has to do with the question of whether both houses of Congress go along with this or not, and they play out very differently depending on the results of that.
It's confounding how many critics the president had for his unilateral action in Libya, and how many of those same critics are now saying he waited too long by consulting with Congress in the case of Syria. How would you respond to that criticism?
Well, I would respond privately to that criticism by saying that in many cases, what we're dealing with here is political rhetoric, and this is where the politics of the situation begins to move in. We're not only talking about a president who's in his second term. But we're also talking about 435 members of the House of Representatives and 30-some-odd members of the Senate who are up for re-election in 2014. And added to that, a number of sitting members, particularly of the Senate, who plan to run for president in 2016. All of this comes into play. I think that we're playing this out in two ways. I think in the larger sense, we're playing this out in the shadow of George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq, with the phony information about what was and wasn't there, and I think that's feeding a lot of what we're seeing in terms of this demand for more proof. Although I have to say, I do wish that the administration would release some more information. I don't know why they're not. I'm not an expert on this, but I wish they would. I think their job might be easier if they would or could. But you've got the others. The more focused piece of this is that we have a number of possible presidential contenders who are trying to avoid the Hillary Clinton situation. When she ran for president in 2008, one of the things, certainly the first, I think, crack in that wall of inevitability was the issue of her yes vote on the invasion of Iraq. And a number of Republican contenders are trying, I think, right now to figure out how this vote will be, whatever that vote is, how it will be interpreted 2 years from now, as opposed to how it will be interpreted now. Among them is probably Secretary Clinton, who also has to sort of deal with this if, in fact, she is seriously considering running for president.
So it's not just the president on the hot spot.
No,
the members of Congress are there also.
Yeah.
And there's a side of me that is glad that he's in his last term, because my hope would be he will not make a decision on the basis of another election. He'll make it on the basis of his own conscience.
I think that's true to some extent, but we have to remember that while the pressure for re-election is no longer there, the final political pressure, maybe final, maybe not, but one of the political pressures that remains is any president wants as his final act to pass on the presidency to someone in his own party. So I think rather than worrying about re-election, which is obviously an overpowering need for attention for any president running for their second term, that is part of it. I think this president, like any president, wants to be able to look back and say that he passed on the presidency to another member of his party.
I hate to mention this, I really do, but we've seen some really ugly extremist talk about all of this. Rush Limbaugh speculated that the administration had a hand in deliberately causing the chemical attack in Syria. I never thought he could go that far.
Well,
others have dismissed the entire matter as a quote, a distraction from Obamacare. Is it crazier than it's ever been out there?
The simple answer, I think, is yes. And I think as we are, as a nation, I think finding ourselves further and further apart from each other in so many ways, this kind of rhetoric plays to very specific audiences who actually do feed on this stuff. So it does seem to be so much more of it, but we continue to be very increasingly splintered, I think, as a society, which is very distressing.
What do you think it's been like in the White House the last few days?
I'm sure that it's been very, very stressful. I think there's probably been more than one shouting match, second guessing on a number of fronts, trying to figure out where they should be, where they need to be. I've no doubt about it.
Can you see any scenario in which the president comes out of this without being hurt?
Actually, I do. I think that I think that if and this leads to that other question. I suspect if I were a betting man, and I'm not, but if I were, I would probably put money on both houses of Congress. We're going to go through a lot of machinations and twists and turns before we get there. But I think that in the end, both houses will probably sign on to this, probably by very narrow margins. And as I said, after a lot of nasty rhetoric has been thrown around.
Yeah.
And I think that if the president gets that, it does enhance his position on an international level, and to some extent, it certainly doesn't hurt him on the domestic level as well. I think then the next big question is: do we succeed in what we're about to do? And that we won't know until we're there.
Yeah, and that's a whole other discussion.
Yep.
Greg Lebel is a veteran of numerous presidential campaigns and our go-to guy on the workings of Washington. Greg is assistant professor of political management at George Washington University, where I'm sure this is going to be one action-packed semester for him. Mm-hmm. Greg, as always, you enlighten us and make us think it through, and I thank you for being with us here on State of Belief Radio.
Thanks, Wilton.